Urban myths are a fascinating reflection of the cultures that create them, weaving tales of terror, mystery, and intrigue unique to each region. From Japan's eerie forest spirits to the vanishing hitchhikers of American highways, these stories are shaped by local traditions, landscapes, and fears. While some are rooted in historical events or cautionary lessons, others seem to emerge purely from the imagination, spreading through whispers and evolving over time. The truth behind them is often elusive, blurred by embellishment and hearsay, but their power lies in the universal sense of unease they evoke, making us question what might lurk in the shadows. In the small town of Cypress Hollow, nestled deep in Louisiana's Bayou country, the air always seemed heavier, wetter, as if the swamps themselves were alive and breathing. Locals often spoke in hushed tones about Blackwater Bayou, a winding, murky stretch of water surrounded by ancient cypress trees draped with Spanish moss. It was beautiful during the day, but at night, it turned into something else. Something sinister. Jeremiah Hodge, a local handyman, disappeared there in 1986. He was last seen heading toward the bayou, a lantern swinging in his hand, mumbling about hearing a woman's voice calling for help. What happened to Jeremiah became one of the town's most enduring mysteries, whispered about over generations. Jeremiah was a man of habit, known for his quiet demeanor and work ethic. He lived alone in a weathered cabin not far from the bayou and was respected, though not particularly well liked. That night, he had been finishing repairs at the old bourgeois plantation house when he heard it. A faint cry, soft and pleading, drifting on the humid air. "Help me," the voice whispered, just barely audible over the chirping of frogs and the buzzing of insects. Jeremiah paused, his brow furrowing. It was late, and the bourgeois property bordered the dense swamp. He called out, "Who's there?" The voice came again, closer this time. "Please, someone." Jeremiah hesitated. His gut told him to head home and leave well enough alone, but something about the voice, so fragile, so desperate, compelled him to act. Grabbing a lantern from the porch, he stepped into the thick, wet night, following the sound toward the bayou. The locals said that Blackwater Bayou wasn't just dangerous because of the gators and quicksand, it was cursed. For centuries, stories had circulated about the La Cherie, a spirit said to haunt the waters. According to legend, the La Cherie was a woman who had drowned in the bayou after being betrayed by her lover. Her grief transformed her into something vengeful, and now she lured the living into the swamp with her mournful cries, only to drag them down to the depths. Jeremiah didn't believe in ghost stories, but as he pushed deeper into the swamp that night, the air grew colder, and the darkness seemed to press in tighter. The voice guided him, faint yet insistent, leading him further from the safety of the plantation house. "Where are you?" he called, his own voice shaky. No answer, only the sound of water lapping against the shore and the rustling of unseen creatures. His lantern flickered, casting strange shadows that danced across the cypress trees. The swamp felt alive, watching him. Then, he saw her. A woman stood at the edge of the water, her back turned to him. Her long hair clung to her pale skin, and she wore a tattered white dress that seemed to shimmer in the lantern light. Jeremiah's breath caught in his throat. He hadn't expected to actually find someone. "Ma'am," he said cautiously, stepping closer. "Are you all right?" The woman didn't move. Her head tilted slightly, as if she'd heard him but wasn't sure whether to respond. Jeremiah hesitated. Something about her was off. The stillness of her body. The way the water at her feet rippled without her moving. He swallowed hard and took another step forward. "Do you need help?" Slowly, the woman turned. Jeremiah felt the air leave his lungs. Her face was impossibly pale, her eyes dark pits that seemed to stretch endlessly into nothingness. Her lips twisted into a smile, cold, cruel, and far too wide for her face. "Help me," she whispered, her voice echoing unnaturally. Jeremiah stumbled back, the lantern shaking in his hand. "What are you—" Before he could finish, she lunged at him. Her movements were unnatural, like a puppet yanked by invisible strings. Jeremiah dropped the lantern and ran, his boots sinking into the soft, wet ground as he tore through the swamp. The cries of the woman followed him, growing louder, more distorted. "Don't leave me!" she shrieked, her voice now a guttural wail. Jeremiah tripped on a root and fell hard. The wind knocked from his lungs. When he looked up, she was there, crouched above him, her hollow eyes boring into his soul. "You're mine now," she hissed. Days later, Jeremiah's disappearance was reported. The sheriff's department organized a search party, combing the swamp for any sign of him. They found his lantern near the water's edge, its glass cracked and the flame long extinguished. His footprints led into the bayou but stopped abruptly, as if he'd vanished into thin air. Sophia had never believed in curses. As an art historian, she dealt in facts, not superstitions. So when her mentor gifted her a painting of the crying boy, she didn't think twice about hanging it in her apartment. The piece was hauntingly beautiful, an oil painting of a young boy with tear-streaked cheeks, his sorrow captured with unnerving realism. It wasn't until strange things began happening that Sophia remembered the legend. The crying boy paintings, popular in mid-20th century Italy, were said to bring misfortune to their owners. Stories of fires breaking out in homes that displayed the paintings were common, and yet the artwork itself was always found unscathed. Sophia brushed off the stories as coincidence, but the longer the painting stayed in her apartment, the more uneasy she felt. Shadows seemed to move when she wasn't looking, and at night, she swore she heard faint sobbing. One night, as a storm raged outside, Sophia woke to the smell of smoke. Her heart pounded as she bolted from bed, scanning the apartment. To her relief, there was no fire, but the painting was different. The boy's eyes, once full of sadness, now glimmered with malice. "Just my imagination," she muttered, turning the painting to face the wall. The next morning, her neighbor banged on her door. His apartment had caught fire in the night. The cause was unknown. Sophia's unease grew. That evening, as she returned home, she found the painting had been turned back around. She froze, dread pooling in her stomach. She was certain she'd left it facing the wall. The sobbing returned, louder now, echoing through the apartment. Sophia grabbed the painting, intending to throw it out, but the boy's expression stopped her. His tears seemed to shimmer, as if the paint were wet. "Please don't," a voice whispered, soft and pleading. Sophia dropped the painting, stumbling back. The sobbing turned to laughter, deep, guttural, and wrong. The room filled with smoke, and as the walls blackened, the boy's eyes glowed with a sinister light. Sophia fled, the laughter chasing her into the night. When she returned with help, the apartment was untouched, but the painting was gone. Ren had always wanted to visit Japan. When her company sent her to Tokyo for a conference, she extended her trip to explore the countryside. One site fascinated her above all others: Aokigahara, the infamous Sea of Trees, known for its haunting beauty and its dark history. She wasn't superstitious. Ghost stories about the forest seemed exaggerated, tabloid fodder for tourists. Still, Ren felt a nervous thrill as she approached the entrance to Aokigahara, camera in hand. The early morning mist clung to the ground and the dense canopy muted the world, making the forest feel eerily detached from reality. Ren wandered deeper, marveling at the twisted trees and lava-carved terrain. An hour in, she stumbled upon something unsettling. A weathered ribbon tied around a tree, trailing into the undergrowth. Must have been someone's path marker, she muttered. But as she followed it, she noticed other oddities. A shoe sticking out of the soil, torn fabric snagged on a branch. Her unease grew, but she pressed on, curiosity overriding caution. Then she heard it. A whisper, faint and melodic, weaving through the silence. She froze, listening. It wasn't the wind. The sound carried intention, a beckoning quality that sent chills racing up her spine. Against her better judgment, she called out, "Hello, is someone there?" The whispering stopped. Silence engulfed her, heavy and oppressive. Wren turned to leave, but the forest had transformed. The path she'd taken was gone, replaced by endless rows of identical trees. Panic gnawed at her as she spun in circles, her breaths coming fast and shallow. "Just stay calm," she told herself, gripping her camera like a lifeline. But the whisper returned, louder this time, closer. "Wren," it sang, drawing her name out like a sinister melody. She whirled around. A figure stood among the trees, a woman with long black hair obscuring her face, her white kimono stained with dirt. Wren stumbled back, nearly tripping over a root. The woman didn't move, but the whisper grew louder, overlapping voices filling the air. "Wren, come closer." The woman's head jerked up, revealing hollow, blackened eyes and a mouth stretched wide in a grotesque grin. Wren screamed and bolted, weaving through the trees. The voices followed, rising to a cacophony that drowned out her thoughts. Her foot caught on something, and she fell hard, her camera skidding away. When she looked up, the woman was crouched before her, impossibly close. A skeletal hand reached out, brushing Wren's cheek. "You'll stay," the whisper promised. Wren's scream echoed through the forest, swallowed by the sea of trees. David loved road trips. There was something liberating about the open road, the freedom to go wherever you pleased. When his college friends dared him to drive the N9 highway at night, he jumped at the chance. The N9, infamous for its ghostly hitchhiker, was a legend in South Africa, but David laughed it off as nonsense. He set off just past midnight, the desolate stretch of road illuminated only by his car's headlights. The landscape was barren, shadows dancing across the asphalt. The air inside the car grew cold despite the heater, and David chalked it up to the night chill. An hour in, he spotted her, a young woman standing by the roadside, her long hair and white dress billowing in the wind. She raised her hand in a silent plea. David hesitated. The legend said picking her up meant inviting death, but she looked so real, so vulnerable. Guilt won out, and he pulled over. "Need a ride?" he called, rolling down the window. She nodded, her movements slow and deliberate. She climbed into the back seat without a word, her face partially obscured by her hair. David tried to make small talk, but she remained silent, staring out the window. As they drove, a strange tension filled the air. David glanced at the rearview mirror and froze. Her reflection was gone. His stomach churned, but he forced himself to stay calm. "Where do you need to go?" he asked, his voice trembling. Her head turned slowly, and for the first time, David saw her face, pale and emotionless, her eyes two empty voids. She opened her mouth, and a guttural scream erupted, piercing and inhuman. David slammed on the brakes, the car skidding to a stop. He turned to face her, but the back seat was empty. Shaking, he sped away, his hands gripping the wheel so tightly his knuckles turned white. When he reached the next town, he stopped at a gas station, needing to catch his breath. The attendant gave him a strange look. "You all right?" the man asked. David nodded, but couldn't bring himself to speak. As he paid, the attendant noticed something on his car. "Hey, you've got something on your window." David stepped outside, his heart sinking. Written in the condensation on the rear window were the words, "See you again."